Hi folks, what I thought we'd do today is have a look at some new crampons that I've got, KTS crampons, and compare them with other sort of traction devices I've got, microspikes and full-on crampons. So yeah, now it's icy, I hope you find this useful. My name's John and I make videos on camping, astronomy and walking. If you like what you see in this video, then please check my channel out, as there may be others that interest you there. But in the meantime, let's crack on with today's video. I'm quite lucky at this time of year because my birthday is really close to Christmas, and in fact I had my birthday earlier on this week. So this year at Christmas I got this ice axe, and for my birthday I've got some KTS crampons, and I've also got a Fox One tent, which is a little micro tent really. Not much use in the winter I think, because the space in it will be minimal, but nonetheless I'm going to give it a little test out in the back garden over the next week or so, and use my OEX Leviathan sleeping bag as well, because the temperature is going to be something like -2 or so. I live in the southeast of England and we're in a tier 4 area, so I'm marooned down here and all the snow at the moment is up north. I'm hoping to get some snow down here, but nonetheless, even if we do, I'm not going to get to use my ice axe, because you'd look a bit stupid on the South Downs with an ice axe, and you don't need one anyway. These crampons, if it did snow here, I would try them out on the Downs, and I'll explain why I find them so interesting as we go through this video. Looking forward to being able to see this again. Looking at the microspikes first then, you'll notice how I'm not putting my spikes or my boot directly on the table, as Mrs. Camping Astronomer wouldn't be very happy with that, I think. Microspikes are quite easy to fit. You simply stick your toe in and pull the heel section back towards the heel. They're very elasticy, so they stay in place, but there is often a strap that's used to give a little bit more stability. They're considerably easier to put on when you're wearing the shoes compared to when you're not. Now, my microspikes here are made by a company called Pogu. I bought these years ago. Pogu still exist, but they don't do microspikes anymore. They seem to have moved into fluorescent material, safety material for kids and such like. But two common manufacturers are Kahtoola, and they make microspikes, and Gravel, their version's called Gravel Ran, and it's quite a lot cheaper than the Kahtoola spikes as well, so they're probably worth looking at. And there's an innumerable number of manufacturers in China making them. If you look on Amazon for microspikes, you get loads of them. I'm probably going to have to replace these ones because my boot size has gone up as I've got older. I mentioned in a previous video I'd had to buy new winter boots because my boot size seems to have gone up from a 43 to a 44, and these are quite a really hard tight fit to get them onto these size 44 boots. I suspect these were geared, or certainly 10 years ago they would have been geared around size 43 boots, and that's the kind of cut-off point between medium and large microspikes. So I think I'll have to get some new ones, and I'll probably go for the Gravel ones simply because they're so much cheaper than the Kahtoola ones. The advantage of this type of traction system microspikes is they're completely flexible, so they go on, you can see they can bend right over. They go on any type of shoe that you want, you know, trainers, running shoes, walking boots, mountaineering boots, whatever you want, you can put these things on. The actual spikes themselves are I think between typically a quarter of an inch and 3/8 of an inch, typically made out of stainless steel. So micro spikes then are ideally suited for putting in your rucksack for when you come across icy stretches of path, and quite commonly in the lakes and the peaks and even the South Downs, when you get a dumping of snow, the footpaths get covered in compacted snow and ice and become extremely slippery. And these sorts of devices are perfect for that. And I used to use mine all the time. We used to have a dog, and just walking on pavements once it snowed can be somewhat challenging. And they make a huge difference to your ability to not fall and slip over on the ice. So they're really useful pieces of kit to have with you. So now we'll look at a typical pair of walking crampons. My ones are made by Climbing Technology, which is an Italian brand, I think, and an equivalent will be the Gravel G10s. They usually have 10 spikes, 4 on the back and 6 on the front, and they typically the cup for the toe and the heel fold down for storage and transport. They're held on by one long strap here, which we'll look at in a minute, and they haven't got points on the front which are suitable for front pointing, so this limits their use to kind of general walking use on sort of shallow to moderate slopes. They can't be used for mountaineering, climbing up gullies, all that sort of thing. And they've got a central bar which is able to flex, which means they can go on footwear typically rated B1. These would be C1 rated crampons. So they go on my Scarpa SL Active boots, for example. They're not really intended for use on more flexible footwear than B1 rated boots, although you often do come across people who've done that. From my experience, I did try that once, not with these crampons. You'll see why when I tell you the story, but I was climbing Helvellyn with a friend of mine, not via any of the dodgy routes, just the kind of easy routes, and I was 3/4 of the way up. It was fairly snowy and quite deep snow, and I suddenly realised that one of my crampons wasn't on my feet anymore, and I was using B0 rated boots, which basically means they were too flexible for the crampons. And what basically happens, as the foot flexes, so does the boot if it's a flexible boot, and the boot essentially becomes that little bit shorter, and that enabled it to come out of the crampon. It was probably my own stupid fault for not checking the tension on the straps. Really, you should be doing that quite regularly. But there I was, marooned up Helvellyn with only one crampon. As it happened, it didn't really matter too much, and the mate that I was with, he had a safety rope with him anyway, so I tied on to his rope, and I won't say I hopped back down the mountain, but I came down the mountain okay. But I learned a bit of a lesson there, so promptly went out and bought some B1 boots and had to get a different set of crampons because obviously one of mine was lost in a snowdrift somewhere. So that's the official line and my experience of it. I do know people who use these crampons on B0 rated boots and seem to be okay, but from my point of view, I'm not really prepared to take that risk. As far as the flexibility goes, you can see these have a little bit of flexibility here, but now we'll put the boot in the crampon. And crampons are kind of left and right footed incidentally, so you need to put it in the right one. And we'll run the strap round it. So this is how my boots are strapped up. I've got a feeling that the Gravel ones might work the other way round, but with mine you pass the strap around the front of the boot and then through the loop on the other side of the heel cup and underneath the little slot in the toe cap. And now we have two little rings here. The strap goes through both rings and then folds back on itself through the first ring, at which point you tighten it up. And you kind of need to have a good few goes at doing this tightening, just to make sure you've got all the slack out of the straps. And that's basically it. And then what you should be doing is after about 10 minutes of walking, you should be checking to see that your straps are still tight, because usually they do loosen up a bit. And this was probably the mistake that I made on Helvellyn, not doing that. Having tightened the strap up, you then want to get rid of this long dangly bit so that you don't trip over it. And that's that. That's job done there. It's a bit easier to do it when your foot's in the boot, because you can sort of stamp down and stamp forward, but it's not too bad. A little bit fiddly with the single strap. As I say, I think the Gravel ones, rather than running the strap across the boot and then down and back, may go to the toe end of the boot, round and across. I'm not sure. The different manufacturers have different ideas. To release the strap, you just pull on this toggle. Once you've yanked out the spare, you pull on the toggle and that immediately loosens everything up. So it's important to remember here that these type of crampons, the flexible C1 rated crampons, are only suitable for walking, not climbing, and really need relatively stiff boots so you don't run the risk of your foot coming out. And they also need a little bit of a funny gait when you walk, because because you've not got any flexibility, you want all the points to sink in at the same time. So you tend to walk in a little bit of a funny manner, which takes a little bit of practice and getting used to. But once you've done that, they're not too bad at all. And normally when you're using this type of footwear, you'd want to have an ice axe with you in case you reached a slope where a trip might or a slip might lead to something nasty. One thing it is also worth bearing in mind when you're using these sorts of things is it's well worth using gaiters, because not specifically to stop your feet getting wet, although they are handy to if you go through deep snow. But if you snag the points on your expensive waterproof trousers, you can ruin them. Whereas a pair of gaiters, if you snag on them, they tend to be typically more durable anyway. And if you have to replace a pair of gaiters, that's not the end of the world. The spikes on these are 1 inch long versus the sort of 1/4 to 3/8 inch spikes on my little micro spikes that I just showed you. So now we come to my birthday present from earlier on this week, which are the Kahtoola KTS crampons, and they're notable in that they've got a very flexible central bar. You remember I bent the one on the previous crampons that I showed you. These are more flexible crampons and have a completely different binding system. Now this means that in theory they can be used for trail running shoes, general winter hiking, not mountaineering, just non-technical hill walking. But the idea of these is that you can fit these on trainers, trail running shoes, B0 boots, B1 boots, even mountaineering boots if you want. I gather they have actually been used to climb Everest. There was a guy from the Khumbu region, from the Sherpas over there, who did a speed climb on Everest using these things, and managed to do Everest in about 10 hours. They are quite light, they're lighter than normal crampons, which presumably is why he was using them. But let's have a little look at them. So there are a few notable features. The first is that the toe box area here has a completely independent strapping system to the heel area. So if you've got an independent front and rear of the crampon, it means that when the boots flex, you don't lose any of the security associated with the strapping, which is what happens with the kind of single strap mechanism that I had on the Climbing Technologies C1 rated crampon. Now the unique thing about these crampons is this central bar here. It's basically made to a leaf spring design, and it's way more flexible than you got with my C1 rated crampons, and it's this independent binding system plus the very flexible central bar that means that these things can be used on all sorts of bits of footwear. They have 1-inch spikes, which is the same as my C1 grade crampons, but they're not quite as beefy, these spikes, as the C1 grade ones. And the adjustment for length is simply with a little bar here that you slide up and down. They come in two sizes. One is suitable for up to size 9 basically, and then the larger size goes from 9 and up. My boot size is 9.5, so I've gone for the large size and ended up here about halfway through the adjustment system. Now many moons ago, in 1991 I think it was, I went to Everest Base Camp on a trekking holiday. These are my carefree, free and single days, and I went in December, so it was this time of year, which is also winter time in the Himalayan region. And once we got above probably 10,000 feet or so, around and about the Namche Bazaar area, basically the ground was covered in snow. To give you an idea, here's a couple of pics. So these were taken just after the Tengboche Monastery, and being 1991, digital cameras didn't exist in those days, so these were prints that I've had to take photographs of to digitalise. Yeah, those pictures were taken, I think, Christmas Day 1991. But anyway, I remember coming back from base camp, walking towards Namche Bazaar, which takes 2 or 3 days if I remember rightly, and the path that you were on was an absolute skating rink, because at night time it would drop to about -15, -20 centigrade, and during the day it would warm up a bit perhaps to sort of 4 or 5 degrees centigrade, and typically the sun was out. So a lot of ice would melt during the day and snow and then refreeze overnight. And when it's refreezing at sort of minus 20 degrees, you get very, very hard ice. And I remember being really quite concerned on the way back that the risks of slipping over and landing awkwardly and maybe breaking your wrist or your elbow or something wasn't really something you'd want to contemplate in that sort of environment where you can't just nip down the local A&E. And had this sort of thing existed, lightweight, flexible walking crampons in those days, they would have been absolutely perfect for that, because they don't take up much space, they don't take up much weight, they can cope with quite hard ice, and so they would have been perfect. Even microspikes would have been better than nothing. Setting up these crampons can be a tiny bit fiddly, so it's not something you want to leave till the day that you actually use them. You basically adjust the length of these toe straps here using one adjustment here and one up here until the toe box that you generate actually holds your toe of your boot. The heel strap's relatively straightforward, that's just a pull-on strap, and the length is very, very easy to adjust just via this mechanism here, which people who've used crampons before will be very familiar with. The fact that it's a little bit fiddly to adjust initially means that these things may not actually be ideally suited if you're constantly chopping and changing the footwear that you're using them with. But for me, I'm just intending them to use them with these boots here. So having more or less set the straps up, you slide the boot into the toe area and tighten the toe strap. And then drop the heel in and tighten that. So now the boot won't come out at all. It's held very rigidly. So once you've spent a few minutes initially setting up this area here, the toe box area, then when you subsequently put the boots on, it's very, very quick, and it's much easier when you're actually wearing them, because I can't kick my boots here sufficiently towards the end just by putting them in. Whereas I've actually tested this in my garden, and I was able to stand up and put my boots in these crampons, which is something I've never ever managed to do with normal crampons. So a little bit of time spent fiddling at the setup stage means that when you have to put them on, it's much easier in the future to do so. And I suspect because of this buckle system here, and that you're only really using this strap, that if you've got gloved hands, it's easier to put them on. You don't necessarily have to take your gloves off. So what you're aiming with the setup of these is the toe to be pushed fully forward to the end of the crampon. These straps here and here to be tight. This I've already folded back and it's still flapping around, so I'm probably going to cut that bit off. I don't need that length. Here I've tidied away the loose bit. And the heel is held very tightly there. For me, my plan is to use these on my B1 rated boots, my Scarpa Active SLs, even though I don't need to, because the boots have got thicker leather, so they're that much warmer. And if I do manage to get away from the southeast of England in the snowy area this year, I shall be testing them out on some of the easier walking routes in the Lake District. As I say, these things aren't for climbing, they're for walking, but the sort of simple routes up Helvellyn and stuff like that would be perfect. And they're also fine for slippery paths and that kind of thing. They are sold as a device to go on trail running shoes, and I know people do use them for that. The fact that you can have a natural walking gait is one of the advantages over my kind of standard Climbing Technologies C1 grade crampons, so I'm quite keen to see how they pan out. At the minute, I suspect that the lockdown situations here means that I'm not going to get up to the Lake District or the Peak District. I've got the Brecon Beacons sort of earmarked as a potential day trip, but at the minute I can't actually leave the southeast of England. So I think these things are just going to get tested out on the South Downs if we're lucky enough to get a bit of a dumping of snow. But because they're so flexible, there's no reason why they can't be used in the snow and ice on the South Downs, where you don't really need any special gear. You just want something to stop you falling over. So I shall be testing them out, God willing, on the Downs. Hi folks, well I've redone my outro. We've had new announcements about COVID type restrictions here, and the whole country's going into level 5, which basically means that I shan't be getting any upland area walking in the lakes or the peaks or the Brecon Beacons. Luckily for me, I live very close to the South Downs, so I'm still clinging on to the hope that I'll get a bit of a snow walk on the South Downs this winter and be able to try out my new Kahtoola KTS crampons. For those of you that live within spitting distance of the mountains in Wales or in the peaks or the lakes or up in Scotland, I hope you managed to get out in the snow this year and enjoy your snow walking. I hope those of you that are new to winter walking have found this video handy, covering the different types of spikes that you can use. I mentioned in the video that Pogu don't make spikes anymore, but in fact they still do. I found them on their website, and they're sort of 35 to 40 pound. These are dead handy for any kind of walking when it's icy. But anyway, I wish you all well. I hope you stay safe, and I look forward to seeing you next time. My next video is going to be an astronomy one, and a few days after that I'm going to go out in the back garden. The temperature is going to be -2, -3, and do a little tester camp on my OEX Fox 1 and my Leviathan, OEX Leviathan 900 sleeping bag. Now the temperature's dropped to the point where I should really get the benefit out of that sleeping bag. So yeah, I look forward to seeing you next time. Take care.